Recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome to One Book, One New Orleans, April 2025 community book discussion. We're so excited to have you all here in the virtual space tonight to discuss our 2025 selection, Daughters of the New Year by E.M. Tran, aka Lizzie. And we're really excited to have Lizzie here with us as well to talk about the book and answer all of your burning questions. I know I have burning questions and I will ask them all if other people don't. So please feel free to do that first. If you're not familiar with One Book, One New Orleans, we pick one book every year and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time with the idea that we'll grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. But when we do that, we also have to recognize that approximately 27% of the adults in our city struggle with literacy every single day. And so we're working to break down barriers that would prevent people from accessing that one book and making sure that everyone who wants to can participate in the community reading experience. So, whether your barrier is low literacy, whether your barrier is poverty, whether your barrier is incarceration, or your barrier is blindness, or in other somewhat other way print handicapped, we are trying to make sure the book is available to you. If you want to know more about that work and the day-to-day things that entails, please let me know and I would be happy to stay on after to discuss with you. Welcome, Marilyn. You're just in time. But I'm not going to bore you guys with 10 minutes of what one book does. I'm instead going to immediately just ask you all who have read the book or who may just be jumping in for the first time if you have any questions you'd like to start. Lizzie is open to anything, so feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. If someone else is talking and you start having a burning question, just use a little raise your hand emoji.
Hey, well, I was curious about the way the book is structured. You probably get asked that question a lot, but it's a very interesting way that it's structured. And what how did that come about?
Um, Thank you for asking that. Um, yes, people do ask about that, the structure a lot, but I actually don't get tired of answering it because it's one of the, I mean, most important aspects of the book, first of all. And also, it was also like a very self-discovery for myself as a writer in, letting go of the actual traditional structure of the book and just letting myself write it in the way that I wrote it. So I like it when people ask that actually. And when I first started writing it, I was also working on my PhD in graduate school, and I was researching Vietnamese history because when I was growing up and in school and um, in college, I didn't really receive a lot of education about the Vietnam War or about Southeast Asia in general. And so um, I started taking classes and doing my own research and really targeting my reading list and all of my research towards this topic because I was really interested in learning more about, uh, ultimately about my family, really. And when I started doing this research, I discovered these woman warriors who were, um, they had been elevated to this mythological level. They were real people who had, and actually the women warriors, there's the Trung sisters and the Lady True. They were both at different time periods, but they were all women, and they led these resistance movements against, Chinese invasions. And so, of course, like throughout time, they have been used for different political means and ends, and they've been kind of turned into these national symbols of nationalism, and they've been turned into these, again, mythological figures. I was really, really interested in them, because they were real people who had been kind of deformed into this, whatever was convenient for whoever's narrative. And I was also really interested in them because they were women. And Vietnam is a very, patriarchal type society. They really value and center men and in the family structure and in the historical record, men are often praised and centered in that. And so I was really interested in the fact that they were women. And so I wanted to include them in the book, but it was really difficult because I was also writing about a family in 2016, and I didn't know how to include both of those things at the same time because it felt like the actual expanse of time that I was trying to put into the book was so vast. And so I started, I tried to do it in various ways. I started with the women warriors. I started, at the beginning, quote unquote. And then I started, I tried to start with the other parts of the book and try to do flashbacks, and that wasn't really working. And so the where I ended up really kind of going backwards was that I started at the most recent moment, the moment that was really closest to me in time and space. And I realized as I was writing it that I was really more interested in what had happened to the characters in the past than I was in the consequences of their actions going forward. So I started doing it backwards. I just thought it would be interesting to do it that way. And once I started doing it that way, it really opened up, um, you know, what I was able to write about. It really opened up my imagination. And it felt like because the farther you go back in time, the less you know about, the way that people lived or what kind of experiences they had. It really made it so much fun to imagine um, what it was that these people very, very far in the past, what they had affected with the characters we meet in the beginning. So, um, yeah, it was a challenge because it made it very hard to revise the book moving backwards because I had also tied it to zodiac years. So each chapter was also like very specifically tied to the age of the character and what year it was happening um so I couldn't really move things around that easily. But it was a really wonderful challenge because it also forced me to think about storytelling in a different way. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for opening with that, Ambata. Mike, did you want to
Oh,
jump in?
oh, sure. Yeah, I guess I can. I'm kind of dodging my kids doing stuff, so sorry that I'm outside. But I guess this is maybe a more hyper specific question about some things for New Orleans. So many of the locations are recognizable as places in the city, but a lot of the names have been changed. And I was curious whether that was or what decisions went into changing the names of places, whether that was out of necessity for a variety of reasons or a creative choice, things like that.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Nice to see you. Um, yeah, I changed the names, and when I was doing it, I don't know if I necessarily knew why I was doing it. I just thought that I had to. And in since the publication of my book, I've had this kind of like strange insecurity about it. Like, okay, people clearly know that this is, X place or whatever place in New Orleans. And I wonder if they're wondering why I changed the name, or they think that I've like, I've gotten, uh, I'm like trying to hide the fact that this is that place. And it wasn't actually until the Tennessee Williams Festival a couple weeks ago on a panel that Megan was actually a moderator for that someone asked this question and another writer, Morgan Bapst, answered first. And she said, when I was writing my book, I wanted to represent New Orleans in the most, in a kind of almost defensively, like the most accurate way possible. Like, you can't erase us, you can't revise us. These are the exact places. these are the exact names, and I'm recording it for posterity in my book, and this is what it is. And I had like an epiphany on that panel. It's like, I don't know if you know this, Megan, but on that panel, I was like, oh my God, like I know why I changed all the names now. And I didn't know why before, but I had it on this panel in public. And I realized that Morgan and I had the same, we had the same impulse, which was that we wanted to write about New Orleans and we wanted to record it in some way in our books. And we wanted to, portray a version of New Orleans that was in our minds accurate and, maybe not a version of New Orleans that everyone sees. And her reaction to it was to make everything hyper realistic, hyper specific, hyper accurate, hyper real, placed in reality. And my reaction to it was like this rooted in this insecurity that I have as a Vietnamese American woman who lives in New Orleans, who has all her whole life felt like, maybe I'm not New Orleanian enough. Maybe I'm not really from here. Everyone thinks I'm foreign. The way that my family has been treated has been as foreigners. And so my kind of reaction to that was to like just slightly change all of the place names and all of the street names or the neighborhoods, just slightly, so that no one could accuse me of portraying it inaccurately if they said that they couldn't say that I was wrong, right? They couldn't say like, you didn't write, you didn't write New Orleans East exactly the right way. That's not correct. And because I could just say then, like, it's fictional. It's renamed, it's a different name, it's a different place. Disneyland is not Jazzland. Those are two different theme parks. And so we had kind of the same impulse, which was to like record New Orleans, our version of New Orleans, and to do so in a kind of like really in a way that was, I mean, maybe defensive isn't the right word. I don't know. But our insecurities were in different places, or they manifested in different ways. And I had this really this realization in the Hotel Monteleone in the ballroom, as someone in the crowd asked. But it was a really wonderful kind of admission for me to make, because like this whole time I've been like, why did I rename, because there's a neighborhood here called Woodlawn and I renamed it Woodmere. And I was like, why did I rename it Woodmere? Like, why not just call it what it is called, which is Woodlawn? And I kind of had this weird sensitivity about it. But now that I know why I renamed it, I don't feel so sensitive about it. So anyway, yeah, that's why that's why I renamed everything.
I'm so glad you just said that because I was dying when you were talking. Like, I wish we were getting this on camera right now. So, yay, you just said it as we recorded it. Anybody else want to jump in? I have hyper specific dorky questions that I'll ask all day, which I will ask now, I guess, while we wait for other folks to think about their questions. Welcome everyone who just joined. Feel free to jump in. We want this to be a true community discussion, so just unmute or raise your hand or do whatever you got to do to get our attention, and let's have a talk. So I think I'm going to ask, I've got two really hyper specific questions, and they both have to do with names, actually. So since we're talking about names, I think I'll ask the one that has the shorter answer, or what I think might be a shorter answer, first to give other people room to talk. So I noticed, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's divided into two sections, with 1975 being the fall of Saigon as sort of the dividing line between the New Orleans section and the Vietnam section. And I noticed in the Vietnam section, Xuan, am I pronouncing that right?
This one? Yeah.
Thank you. And Tien, they have accent marks in their names in the Vietnam section.
Mhm.
And when we go to the New Orleans section, those accent marks are noticeably absent. And I was wondering about that choice.
Yeah, the choice to include or not include accents was like really fraught for me because uh, I think that any person who writes um any anything that any articles, any books, anything that include in English and includes non-English words has comes upon this kind of predicament, which is like, how do I include this language? And do I italicize it? Do I include the accents? Do I translate it for the reader? Like, what do I do? And for me, I think that I could have included the accents on the names the whole way through, but I wanted to visually communicate to the reader the kind of erasure that happens when you have displacement. And so like for me as like just in real life, my last name is Tran. It's spelled Tran without any accents on it. And that's just my name. That's just the name that I had since I was born. And that's the way that I write it. And that's not to say that it's bad that it doesn't have the accents. It's just the way that I have said my name, the way that I've spelled my name. And there is something I think lost when you take out the accent, and there is something that is fundamentally changed about the name. I mean, not just like visually, but also the way that it sounds when you have the accents on it. The last name Tran is actually Jun, which sounds really different, right? Um, and so like again, like it's not bad. I identify with that name. Like that is my name. But it was really interesting thinking of someone like my mother or my father who came over and their names, whatever they were in Vietnam, had to change. That they had a essentially an identity, like a fundamental identity change because of the way that they spelled and said their names couldn't be said and spelled the same way when they came over. So I was really interested in showing that on the page when you read the book because like especially if you're starting in the present, you're introduced to Swan as Swan, the way that it's spelled with no accents. And it's you don't know anything else until you get into the past and you realize that she's made this kind of, I mean, against her will or not, like this concerted switch in the way that she is presented to the world. So I wanted that, I that was a specific switch over that I had because I did think that it was that stark for many immigrants was that like you leave a place and then you're a different person kind of. Um, but yeah, so that's why I decided to have the accents in the back end of the book, but not once they get to the US.
Yeah, and for me as a reader, when I flip to that second section, I'm going, is this the same person? Because the name is slightly different. And that idea that it's the same person but not that you were just talking about is communicated so beautifully just through an accent mark.
Thank you. Yes, and it's also like Swan, it's in her name, but I think, and you don't see it so starkly until you get to the second half. But in the first half, her daughters do think about the way that their mom is a different person when she's speaking in Vietnamese to her friends. She is a different personality. She's vivacious. Maybe she's funny. They don't know. They can't communicate with her in that language, so they'll never know that version of her because of the language barrier and the kind of gap in communication that happens. I think that's a very common narrative in immigrant families with the generational gap is like if you have a parent who is from a different country who's spoken a different native language and you can't communicate with them in that language, then it's it's almost, I just try to imagine yourself learning a new language. Like it's like I tried to learn French for a couple years and it was like I don't even know who I am in French. Like this person who's speaking in French is like so stuffy. Like she can't tell a joke. Like I can't tell a joke in French, you know? So I think it's just it's really interesting to think about the way how many different identities we have in a single person, just from the way that we speak and the way we present ourselves. I think Marie's asking, would you please pronounce each character's name? Yeah, sure. So in the first half of the book, there's the three daughters. There's True, who is the youngest, Nhi, who's the middle daughter, and Trek, who is the oldest. And then there's the mom, Swan, and then there is the father, Kung. And then in the other half, there's Tien, Tui. Um, I think there's someone else. They all have T names, I'm pretty sure. And then when we get to the very end, there's Lady Chu and the Chung sisters. Would I say them again? Uh, okay. There's Trek, Chu, Nhi, and Swan. That's in the first half. I feel like that's who we really spend the most time with in the book. Um, and then when we get to the second half, we kind of, we go farther and farther back and we spend a little bit less time with the ancestors.
Thank you so much for that.
I have a question.
Sure.
And this is Beverly Rainbolt, and I'm not turning my camera on right now. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Beverly.
But hi. One of the things that I noticed in the story, which I really loved, and the very creative timeline, I just adored. And
Thank you.
little bits of magical, I don't know if they were magical realism or just, going into the mind of the character, but they were all wonderful. The thing that I was curious about is there's a lot of mention throughout about Dad's rage, but we never see it. And I'm curious about your decision there.
Yeah, I made a very conscious decision to focus on the female characters of the book. And that's not to say that Kung isn't an important character. I do think that he is. He shapes his daughter's lives in really fundamental ways, but I wanted to really focus on their narratives, and it's Kung is, I mean, he's a complicated character, and I love him as I loved writing him actually because he's a very nuanced person, but I didn't want the book to be about Kung's, his role as a father. I didn't want it to be about his, the mistakes he's made or the rage that he has. I wanted it to be about the women in the book and the way that they negotiate being in the world, right? Despite obstacles or constraints or misplaced expectations. And I wanted it to be a story about the survival of women over and over and over again, despite, um, really, really terrible circumstances. And so I didn't want necessarily to show Kung in a rage. That wasn't really the point of the book. Although I will say in a previous event that I had, when the book first came out, I had an event at LSU, and someone, a male professor, raised his hand in the crowd, and he said, you're really hard on the men in this book, and we don't really get a lot of them though. It's mostly about the women. I just want to know, like, when it didn't really feel fair. When are you going to write about the men? And I remember thinking, like, what? It doesn't have to be about the men. But you know what? He actually, it took me a couple years, but I've finally come to terms with the fact that maybe I will write about Kung because I do think that he's a very interesting character. So in the end, I don't want to admit it, but I am writing about the men now. But but at the time, I was like, "Sir, how do you feel being erased in this book?" he didn't think that was funny, but you know, not every joke is for everyone.
No, I don't think you had any obligation to write
Of
about.
course, I didn't think that you thought that I should have written about him, but no, the
No, I'm
reason that I
referring
did,
to the LSU professor who I can't even believe asked that question. Not a book about the men. Okay.
yes, I was shocked and appalled, but you know, it was okay. It ended up being fine. But yeah, I'm glad that you noticed I did purposefully kind of leave Kung's um actions off the page. I was really more interested in the female characters. Except when the men are being killed, of course, or poisoned.
So, speaking of men being killed and poisoned, I was doing my deep dive into this book, and my mind got blown once again with naming. So they've got the three sisters, right? And then I was looking up more about Lady True and the Trung sisters, who were real
Mhm.
people. And of course,
Yes.
I noticed, Lady True comes, her name repeats in the daughter, the youngest daughter. And then when I was looking
Mhm.
up the Trung sisters, I noticed that two of the three of them are Track and Knee. So I was wondering about your choice to take those three women warriors that you end the book with and sort of bring their names back in 2016 New Orleans.
Yeah, I was well, first of all, I'm really bad at names. So some writers I feel like are amazing namers. Like, I don't know, you'll read a book and there's a character that just has like this perfectly suitable name that doesn't feel contrived at all, that's just like exactly suited to that person's character. I'm so bad at that. And actually I used to like try to find and record names. Like I would like go through phone books or my writing professor once suggested the police blotter. It's like um but the Vietnamese names were really hard for me because, like if you're not a native speaker, how are you supposed to know like what the implications of the names are, right? Like I mean, and not that every name has a hidden implication or something, but it just some names just evoke certain feelings or personality traits, and there's just no way for me to know. So the kind of route that I went with those characters in the beginning of the book was just to do a callback to these women warriors who had kind of inspired, in part, it was the origins of the book really were these women warriors. And part of the project of the book was also like bringing in the repetition of experiences and images that happen over and over and over again over time. I mean, like history constantly repeats itself, right? Like we're always experiencing in, varying ways the same traumatic things. Unfortunately, we're always kind of working through the same violence or war or whatever else over and over again. And it repeats itself through each generation. And so, and we're quick to forget it, right? Like we have very short memories as human beings. And I mean, like it's even worse today with our like 24-hour news cycle. I feel like one terrible thing happens and then 36 hours later, we're like, what? There's a new terrible thing. And so I think that for me, one of the important things of the book was to just really portray that cyclical nature of what it means to be human. And part of that was to call back to the names. And so we see the woman warriors resurface in various ways not just through the names and not just in those three daughters, but like throughout the book it as ghostly apparitions or you know, in the kind of like the images that we see, the kind of warlike images or like fatigue clad women that pop up throughout. So I was just really interested in creating that kind of cyclical nature throughout the book, partly through names. I see Marie has a question in the chat. Is the mother's interest in the zodiac signs a hobby or part of her religious tradition? Oh, and Beverly says the obituaries used to be a great place to harvest names. Yes, love. I used to love reading the obituaries. Sounds really bleak, but I did. Obituaries are a great place to find names. And when I was teaching, and I was in graduate school at University of Mississippi, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with the kind of reputation of that school, but it's a little she frou frou. Names were great there, though. There was like lots of old money families from Mississippi and New Orleans, and they would send their kids there, and the kids' names were just ridiculous. Um, but you saw I would like, you know, I would poach from my student roll sheets. Like, oh, I'm gonna save that for later. But anyway, to Marie's question, is the mother's interest in the zodiac signs a hobby or part of her religious tradition? It's definitely, I wouldn't say that the zodiac is a religious tradition. I think it's more just like a set of cultural beliefs and practices, which I guess is kind of religious tradition. But you know, like my mother believes in the zodiac, and if I asked her if she thinks it's a religious tradition, I think she would say no. Um, I think that she would, I don't know what she would call it really. It's just something that she believes in. But for the mother in the book, I would say that her interest in it is less to do with um like any formal institutional belief, like, you know, it's like the Catholic Church or something, and more just like it's more emotional, it's a more of an emotional connection. Like she's clinging on to this zodiac, I mean, in part because she really does believe in it, but also because like it's the vestiges of a life that she has left behind, right? Like it's something that she can bring with her and make her feel like she has some semblance of control. Like she's been displaced from her homeland as an adult. It's she lives in a new place, she speaks a different language. Her daughters are, you know, kind of strangers to her, like culturally and also just like um in like personally, like they don't really talk that much. And so like the zodiac is her way of expressing love and also exerting control over a life that feels chaotic and out of her grasp. So I would say, you know, she uses the zodiac as a kind of comfort, what's it called? Like a thunder jacket that we can put on dogs when they're like really nervous. The zodiac is like that. And I, you know, like Asian zodiac, Western zodiac, whatever, I think that the zodiac serves that function in general. Like you know, you can all believe in the zodiac just because you believe in it, but also I think that any kind of belief system like that, I mean, even religion, this the any kind of religious belief system at all is also like this way to try to understand something that we don't understand, right? We don't understand what's going to happen in the future. We don't understand what happens when we die. We don't know what's going to happen. The world is chaotic. And so like there's all these different things that we do to try to make it feel less scary or less out of control. Um, but yeah, that's I think that first one, she's just like homesick. We have another chat post. Francis. Francis,
Hello,
hello.
this is Marilyn Hiddell.
Hi.
I love the book. I felt that the mother character was very sympathetic. I'm in my 80s and trying to navigate with my adult children. And I agree with you in that the Zodiac helped keep a connection to the kids that I'd love to try to find for myself, but it was portrayed so beautifully. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like it really means a lot when people say that Swan was a relatable character who was complicated and that she wasn't just it's funny because I did a school event and I can't remember which school event I did, but some of the students were like, the Swan is so controlling. Like she's always trying to control her kids. And it's really interesting to hear the kids talk about it versus talking to other adults or other parents, or depending on where you are in your life. Um, if you're a new parent or if you have adult children, the different ways that people view Swan's actions. And I think that as myself, when I was a kid, and my mother was very similar to Swan, I thought that she was being controlling, and she was being controlling, but also it came from such a place of love and good intention, and it's still coming from a place of good intention and love. It's just like also rooted in anxiety. And that doesn't make like, if you're that kid in that experience, it doesn't make it less your feelings less valid about that, right? Like maybe you are just trying to be an independent person and your parent is being controlling and you don't understand why. But it's also like so interesting now that I'm an adult person with a child, like all of the ways that I see myself doing the same things that my own mother did, or the anxieties that my mother expressed, and realizing like the different stages of life and how we become empathetic in different ways. And yeah, like writing the book really made me a lot more empathetic towards people like my mom who were parents, but also like in a strange place and didn't know where they were. They didn't have language to talk to like the society that they were thrust into. And so it made me a lot more empathetic towards character. Like I felt, um, a lot, I felt a lot for Swan. Um, but yeah, I definitely think that changes with age, right? Also, thanks for coming, Marilyn. 80? So impressed. If I ever make it to 80, I hope that I come to community virtual book discussions too. Francis said something very nice. Francis said, I just want to say I love your humor. I didn't read the book, but I listened to it, so the differentiation in names is interesting. Also, you're right, there is some familial disconnect, I believe, when an immigrant parent doesn't share their language or culture. The latter part of the book was incredible. Oh, thank you. But it really happened. Incredible. Thank you for meeting today. Thanks for coming. It makes me feel so nice when people show up. Yeah, the latter part of the book was so fun to write because it felt like I could truly just be free of, like, when you are writing something that it in a way there's constraints, right? Because you feel limited by what you're allowed to convey and how you convey it. But when I was going backwards in time, as I got to the parts that I didn't experience myself, or that I just, did some reading about the history of it, I felt so much freer to like make it up and get creative with it and like really imagine what people felt or thought during specific historical moments. And so I had a lot of fun writing the back half of the book, and I'm glad that you liked it. Marilyn, you were in the front row. I'm so happy that I have now shared two spaces with you, this and Zoom.
I would like to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't, I have my ear things on. Um, I'm Maureen O'Dwyer, and hi, Marilyn. We're friends, old friends. But the one thing that no one mentions, or maybe they did before I came in, is I really felt that New Orleans East was a character only because I grew up in New Orleans. I've been here 78 years. So it's it was one way when I was growing up, much younger than you, and to see how things have changed and what, different aspects of the area, and to talk about it and talk about the places, the streets, the it was, to me, that was incredible because it made a connection again to a place that many people that I grew up with have completely forgotten. I mean, completely. So it brought it all. But we used to go there. We used to go visit, go there for the market and things. And it was just very interesting to me to have it all come back to life. So I appreciated that.
Thank you. And I that is one of the things that makes it really special actually to be picked as the One Book, One New Orleans novel, like as
Yes.
a New Orleanian novel, because I do feel like when we get representations of New Orleans, it's always, there's a particular kind of image of New Orleans that we receive in books and also, like in movies and in the national imagination. It's very specific. And I wanted to expand that and I wanted to include New Orleans East and the West Bank too, because it's it's often excluded or erased from our understanding of New Orleans, and it's a really important part of it. So I'm glad that you thought it was its own character. That also makes me feel really good because so many people talk about things like Faulkner's books as making Yaknapatawa County like its own character, like the town, that county itself is its own it's a character in itself, the space. And so it feels really cool when someone says that about your own writing, like, oh, you made New Orleans East a character. Um, that makes me feel like I mean, you didn't say this, but now I feel like I'm Faulkner. So thanks.
You're on your way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I guess if I could ask another question, kind of going back to some of the stuff about the Zodiac, it begins with that description of the competition legend that Zwan tells them every year or so, and there's a lot of competitions in the book, whether that's the Zodiac competition, the beauty pageant in Saigon, $2 Beauty Queen, and then what, Big Fat Loser, and the Eligible Bachelor. And we're kind of running throughout all of these competitions. They all seem to me in some way or another to be kind of rigged or have some element of people putting their thumb on the scale. And I guess I wanted to ask you about uh, what uh, what did you see across about what's this saying about maybe your view about competition or things like that of why all these games are rigged.
Yeah, so everyone, Mike is a game show expert. He's he was one of the few people who was able to identify that $2 Beauty Coon is based on a real on a real game show that I couldn't believe existed. But anyway, you'll have to watch YouTube clips on it later. But I competitions, like shows that make competitions out of things that are absolutely not based on merit, like looks, like beauty pageants are not, like you can't compete in a, it's not like hard work that gets you to a beauty pageant, right? It's just like you're born beautiful or you're not. And like dating shows, like The Bachelor are, I mean, they don't say it's a competition, but it is. One person at the end wins. They end up with The Bachelor. But you can't work hard at falling in love with someone. You either, like, there's just 30 people and then you either get lucky or you don't, right? So I thought it was really interesting that that these kinds of things are put in a competition format, and especially in the context of like US individualism and capitalism, like the US is very much obsessed with this idea that you can compete your way to the top, and whoever wins is the most qualified or the hardest worker or the best in their field or whatever. And it's like it's to the extreme where we've turned it into, it's boiled down, it's trickled down to our television, to all of our reality television, all of our the shows that we watch, our competitions, and it's all rooted in this US idea, this very American idea that you can compete your way to in everything. You can compete for everything. Um, and so I was really interested in including that in the book because the characters are constantly striving to be American. They want to fit in. They want to be a part of the American dream. And I think that this is also the narrative that we're fed, that immigrants are, you know, they come to the US with this idea, like I can achieve the American dream. And it's a narrative that's fed to us from a very young age in school. Um, and the American dream is achieved through hard work. You compete with other people, and if you work hard enough, then you can achieve it, right? So I wanted that to appear in several different ways in the book, and that comes out in the beauty pageant, the eligible bachelor game show, um, in um, the race. I also wanted to contextualize it and kind of like fuse it with the race, the zodiac race, and like create this hybrid fusion culture from the very start, which is like we have this, you know, Vietnamese community that's trying to make its way, and like these characters are acting and behaving in a certain way because they also are like they've been told that they can succeed and do these things, and it's foregrounded with this myth story that they also that's also kind of fit into um this idea that they can do it, right? So anyway, I wanted to create a hybrid of the cultures and also just like foreground it with against what's happening in the US, right? Like why immigrant families are constantly you know, coming with this idea that they can win. Which of course is like you said, Mike, it's rigged. Like it's like sure. And on the other side of it, when we're thinking about the zodiac, it's like these are magic animals, and like the best animal didn't win. We have all these kinds of like obstacles in the way. Some of them are like lying. Some of the like the snake is next to the dragon. They arrive at the same time, but the dragon gets to come in before the snake. Like, what's that about? Like, so I mean, it's just you know, I'm just really interested in that. And I also love reality television, and I just wanted to write about it. So so I did. Oh, Megan, you linked the $1.98 beauty show. Yes. In Big Fat Loser, which is another game show, uh clearly influenced by The Biggest Loser. Um I I wrote a short story about that actually, but I kind of give it a little shout out in the book. But The Biggest Loser is one of my favorite made up game shows that I wrote about. It's and it's basically I make the host of that show Carson Daly, and I don't know if that's like if Carson Daly's gonna one day read this and be like, this is slander. But Carson Daly is the fake host of this fake show that I made up. And that also appears very briefly in the book. But I'm also watching another show. This is a real show called The Traitors. I don't know if anyone here watches The Traitors. It's amazing. I see Liz Granite. It's like, yes, The Traitors.
Because
Um,
Gabby Windy is on.
yes, Gabby from The Bachelor. There's so many crossovers. I mean, we're also at the point where like the game shows are just all of them are connected. Like the new game shows that they make have all of the contestants from all these other game shows. I just love it. But yeah, I'm watching The Traitors, and the host of the Biggest Loser is on The Traitors. It's basically a giant murder mystery show with like a billion D-list celebrities. Anyway, highly recommend. Maybe one day I'll write about The Traitors in a different book. But I love game shows.
So since you're talking about TV shows, this is Beverly again.
Hi,
And
Beverly.
hi. And you mentioned this is going to age me. But there were times when I felt like Mom reminded me of Lucille Ball.
Really?
In that she was trying so, not Lucille Ball the person, Lucy with Desi, that Lucy. And there were times that she was trying so hard, and it, like her going to and getting that trophy on the West Bank, and I know where that pawn shop is.
You do?
I'm pretty sure I have been to that pawn shop. And I don't know, it was just a flash of I don't know why she reminded me of Lucy, but it was like getting in these bizarre situations, and that made no sense, but it was kind of okay, and it made her more endearing.
Yeah. I feel like Lucille Ball is a tragic character also. A tragic figure. But I take that as a great compliment because I did want my book to be funny. Like I wanted I mean, it's sad, of course, like the characters have, these great tragedies in their life, but I also wanted it to be funny. And part of the humor, I hope, comes from the ridiculous situations, like these kind of absurd moments that the characters find themselves in. And I mean, how many times in my own life have I found myself in an absolutely absurd scenario where it's like, this can't be real, but it's happened enough times that I feel like maybe life is just, maybe just absurdity is just baseline for, I mean, if you're doing it right, I guess. I don't know. Or maybe you're doing it wrong. But yeah, like I wanted the characters to find themselves in these kind of absurd and surreal situations. And the $2 Beauty Queen show was one of those moments where it was kind of like this surreal, ridiculous, like horribly sad also for, because Swan's like in this moment where she's like, how did I end up here? And humiliating too, but absurd too. Like, how does this exist? And it's almost, and that is, it, I mean, it's surreal and absurd, but it's also like, it's not out of the realm of reality. It's something that has happened, right? We have shows like this. We have people who are doing this on television today and yesterday and the day before. And so, we have Lucille Ball on TV doing like ridiculous things and finding herself in ridiculous situations for our entertainment. And I wanted the book to encompass uh that complexity and that difficulty and also like implicate the reader in a weird way, like make the reader feel a little bit uncomfortable that we find it funny or entertaining or enjoyable. Like it's both of those things at the same time, right? It's like, logically that this is humiliating and terrible for this person. It's also like, I can't believe this is happening. Um, so yeah, thank you. I love Lucy.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Oh, thanks for linking the story, Megan.
So we've been rolling for slightly under an hour. I think it's 56 minutes at this point. And I feel like I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So, does anyone have a burning question? Maybe two more? You take two more if we have any?
I'll ask one. Not necessarily burning yet, you know. Um, I felt like the reverse chronology created this sense of uncovering a mystery, like digging deep into the past. It almost felt mythic at times. And I was just curious about your process for mapping that out. What order did you write in, and how did the characters come to you? And I would just love to hear a little bit about that process for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I wrote it pretty much, you know, at this point I'm like, I feel like maybe I have rose-colored glasses on. It's like, oh yeah, I wrote it like so, just one chapter after another. But I know that it wasn't like that. I think I started a few times trying to write it, you know, going forward, like from the back end of the timeline going forward, and then I scrapped that. But then I think once I realized that I wanted it to go backwards, and I also realized that I wanted the characters to be either a dragon, tiger, or a goat, I started mapping it like very much on a timeline. Like I started thinking about like what age I wanted to show the characters at, and when that would have to happen in the backwards timeline of the book. So it was very much like I had a timeline, and because the characters were born in certain years, they had those chapters had to show up at a particular time. And that was actually a very helpful tool for me because, like I mentioned, the actual span, the scope of the time included in the book is so vast. It was hard for me to kind of decide where to start and how to structure it. And having the zodiac really tie me down to specific years made it a lot easier. Um, and yeah, I did, for the most part, I think I wrote it like when I started writing it backwards, I started with that first chapter. I started actually with the Bachelor chapter, and then I moved backwards from there. And then I added the myth in the beginning, like much later, and I switched a couple chapters around, but for the most part I wrote it from front to back, in the order that it was written. But I will say the other thing that helped me to structure it was to think about major historical events, and like knowing which historical events I wanted to include. And it's not that I wanted to include those events like, you know, there's not like a 9/11 chapter. Well, there is, we see the characters when 9/11 happens, but I was less interested in 9/11 as a historical event, and I was more interested in like what was Swan doing during that moment in time, and like why, you know, as a mother and her daughter's in New York, like how does she feel, this anxiety that she feels, like what is she going to do, how does it come out in her daily life. And it really came from this idea that like terrible things happen, these historical major events happen, you know, in our lives. We can pinpoint them, we can say, you know, like I remember where I was when this happened, I remember what I was doing when this happened. But we're our lives are still happening, right? Like there's still the mundane realities of what we do day to day is still happening in the forefront of like these terrible things. And so the historical events really served that purpose in helping me to structure the book. Like I didn't want to write about, you know, the Buddhist monk burning himself. I wanted to write about like what was happening in this family and the family dynamics, and like what they were doing in this like political landscape when that happens. Um, it was very, very helpful for me to structure the book because, like I said, there were just so much ground covered that I was like, how do I like give the reader something to hold on to when they're reading it? So yeah, that was pretty much how I went through it.
Thank you for explaining. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And may I finally add that next week is the anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So your book is so timely. in helping, or the choice of your book is so timely in helping us understand the aftermath. And it really makes it come alive. And I thank you for that. And I
Oh,
thank you, Megan, for bringing it to our attention. The book, I mean. Thank
thank
you.
you. You know, my mother was a beauty queen, and she didn't, there's a whole backstory to it, but she has a gigantic trophy that she brought over from Vietnam. It's very mysterious. I don't know how she brought it over. It's huge. It's a giant silver trophy. It's like the size of my torso. And it is in the Historic New Orleans collection for their Vietnamese exhibit that they're doing for the fall of Saigon for the 50th anniversary. So if you're in New Orleans and you want to see the trophy that inspired a lot of the character of Swan, and the trophy doesn't make it in the book, but the trophy does make it in real life to the New Orleans. So if you want to see it, it's at the HNOC.
I just linked info about that exhibit in the chat so that y'all can get a little bit more. And at some point, probably in August, TBD on the date, we are actually going to partner with HNOC for a little discussion, maybe an interactive community event about the connections between this book and what's at that exhibit, because there are several places where the book and the exhibit, I think, speak directly to one another. So y'all look forward to that. Questions, comments, final thoughts? Seeing none, I will thank everyone for their time this evening and the engagement in the conversation. Can we give Lizzie a virtual round of applause? Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for being here. I see a thank you in the chat. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, everybody. Beverly, Marie, Ambata,
Thank you.
Francis. Try not to forget anybody. Liz. And we will see you all next month in person and throughout the year. Have a good night, everybody.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Thank you.